We are going now to talk about the imposter syndrome, and we are going to be talking with Sanne Feenstra, and she is an assistant professor in organizational psychology at WU Amsterdam, and she has completed her PhD thesis entitled Power in Organizational Life, an investigation on how stable and unstable power affect important organizational leadership outcomes. And she did that in 2020 at the University of Groningen. And she's done a lot of research that focuses on leadership, on power, and the imposter phenomena. And together with IMD and WIN, we have also she's been leading this study on the imposter syndrome. So we are very excited to hear more about that. She's passionate about communicating her work to a wider audience. And she loves to do workshops and speak. And here we have her. Sanne, are you with us?
I am. So thank you again, Kristen, for this nice introduction. And I already overheard the panel, which is a discussion which I think was also very interesting. So thank you for all those great insight. And I think I'm happy to say that a lot of things that I wanted to discuss also kind of touch base with what the panel also said. So it's good to see that there's some good connection between the parts. As Kristen said, my name is Sanne Feenstra, and I'm an assistant professor at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And today I would like to tell you a bit more about the imposter syndrome, and then particularly also present to you some of the results of this particular awesome research project that I conducted together with WIN. So this is kind of the agenda of what I would like to do today. First of all, let me tell you a little bit more what I mean when I talk about the imposter syndrome. So maybe I think many of you have already heard about this phenomenon or syndrome before, but I would like to explain to you a bit more in detail what it is. And then I would like to present the results actually of the project that we conducted. And then finally, also I would like to hear a bit more about your input. So we do a breakout and also talk about your imposter feelings and how that relates to taking risks or not. So that's kind of the agenda for today. So as I said, let's start with this phenomenon, the imposter syndrome. So what is it actually? As I said, I think many of you have heard the term before because it's quite a popular term, especially the last 10 years. Also in the popular media, there's been a lot of attention on the topic, a lot of celebrities who have come forward discussing their own struggles with the imposter syndrome. And also in my field, in the academic field, so in academic and scientific research, more and more researchers are looking into this topic and studying where it comes from and what the consequences are. But the imposter syndrome actually refers mostly, so one of the key elements of this syndrome or phenomenon is the feeling that you think that others overestimate you. So you kind of worry that others think too highly of you. And the reason that you think this is because people who experience this imposter syndrome, they tend to internalize their successes, not to themselves, but externally. So this is also what the picture hopes to illustrate. So when you get an award, when you get nominated, when you get the promotion, when you get a great job, when you get a salary increase, call it, so all these kinds of successes, people tend to not say, okay, this is because I'm great, so thank you. But instead, they tend to attribute it to external causes. So for instance, somebody comes in and tells you got a promotion or you got a job. The reaction is not, that's great because I am great, but the reaction might be, are you sure? Is that maybe a coincidence or why are they doing this? Maybe I'm just lucky. That's also something that you hear a lot. So when people talk about their successes, they say, well, yeah, I was just lucky. I was at the right place at the right time, stuff like that, right? So these kinds of phrases to kind of attribute your success, not to yourself, but more to external factors. And because of this, you feel then like an intellectual fraud, and this is where the term comes from, or imposter. And therefore, as a consequence of that, you are worried that you will be found out, right? So kind of an anxious syndrome in that sense, because now you might be worried that someday they will notice that you're not as good as they thought that you were. So in this sense, it's important to know that it's different from having a low self-esteem, because having low self-esteem is when you think you're not really good. But in that case, you also think that other people think you're not any good. Well, with the imposter phenomenon, it's very much this disconnect between what you think of yourself and what you think that others think of you. And then it's also important to note that because of this difference, the imposter phenomenon is something that mostly happens to high achieving individuals. So people who are actually doing very well, right? So who have this success, who have this status, who have this whatever. This is where kind of imposter phenomenon syndrome most likely is going to occur. So in this research project that Kirsten also was referring to already, but really the aim of this project, or the main question we had, was what are the consequences of feeling like an imposter? This is kind of what we wanted to know. In previous research, we have looked at where do these feelings come from. So this is also something that I have presented to you before. In previous studies, we asked, where do these feelings come from? And this is also something that I presented in previous workshops also here for WIN. And maybe you were there as well. But to quickly recap, so what we saw in this previous project also that we conducted with WIN is that gender stereotypes are very important in shaping specifically the imposter feelings of women. So there's unfortunately still this persuasive stereotype that men, as you can see here, are more dominant, aggressive, assertive, while women are more gentle, warm, etc. And it's noticeable that these gender stereotypes map perfectly to leadership stereotypes. So also the stereotype of a good leader is aggressive, dominant, assertive. So the gender stereotypes maps perfectly on this leadership stereotype, which kind of makes it a misfit for women in leadership positions. And what we see in our research is that indeed these gender stereotypes therefore determine whether the degree to which women feel like imposters. Also, the treatment women receive at work. So I heard it being discussed already quickly in the panel. If somebody does not like to speak or interrupts you more often, so this is kind of a treatment that women tend to get more than men in organizations, and this also fuels their imposter feelings. And finally, as was also discussed during the panel, what's very important also for imposter feelings is that the organizational climates. So what's the climate of the organization like, and the degree of psychological safety that's there. So in an organization where you feel like there's psychological safety and you're allowed to make mistakes, obviously people tend to feel less like imposters. But in this research project, what we wanted to examine instead, because in previous research we looked at predictors, in this research project that I'm presenting today, we will focus on the consequences. So what are the consequences of feeling like an imposter, specifically in organizational settings, right? So in the work setting. And there are a few main focuses we had in this project. So first of all, we wanted to examine the impact of imposter feelings on the well-being of employees. So how did they feel? And specifically in this study, we looked at emotional exhaustion. So this is kind of how exhausted you feel. So kind of at the end of the day of your work day, how do you feel? Do you feel exhausted or do you still feel energized? A second thing that we looked at is the impact of imposter feelings on job satisfaction. So the degree to which people like their jobs and like what they are doing. And finally, which I think is very important for today's session as well, we looked at perceived employability. So this is the degree to which people feel like they are employable, both in their own organization and outside of their organizations. And finally, as I said, specifically important for today is the degree of risk-taking. So how much risk are you willing to take? And does the degree of risk-taking depend on whether people feel like imposters? So this is kind of the focus that we were interested in and which we then conducted a study about. And the study consisted of the following thing is, and I think maybe some of you or many of you have seen the request coming in of a questionnaire asking you to answer some questions about your experiences at your workplace. And even maybe some of you are here today actually participated in this study. So if you did, thank you very much. Your input is very valuable to us. And what we did, we asked members of WIN, so all of you, to complete 2 surveys in 2 points in time. We did this 2 points in time so that we can really over time see how imposter feelings impact the things I just discussed. So at time 1, we had a survey which asked about imposter feelings, and then at time 2, we asked about these workplace experiences. Now, we are happy to say that many of you responded to our calls to participate in this research project. So that's of course awesome. As I said, your input is very valuable to us. Overall, I think it's maybe interesting for you to also know kind of what the demographics of the WIN community is like. Is that we saw that women who responded were from very many different countries all over the world. So it's very international and also different industries. So there's a big diversity in this group, which is very interesting, I think. Also, what's very noticeable in this group is that most women already had a lot of powerful positions in their organizations. With of the sampled women we had in this research project response, up to 15% being even in top or middle management positions. Also very noticeable is the high education levels of the sample. So that's just so you have a bit of a feeling of who are included in a WIN organization as well, which I think might be interesting for you to know. With regards to the results, we saw the following. So overall, in general, we saw that the women who responded to our surveys experienced indeed imposter feelings in their organizations. They were quite emotionally exhausted. So overall, in general, they had relatively high scores on being emotionally exhausting. They did like their jobs a lot, so it's of course good to see. And what's also interesting to see is that they perceived to have very high employability. So they felt like that kind of career confidence, I also call it. So they really felt like in their organizations that they could move up, or if they would leave their organizations, that they could go and work somewhere else. And with regards to the risk taking, which is of course a topic that we were discussing today, we saw that the respondents were moderately likely to take risks. This is kind of the first take of what we saw in this combined research project. But with regards to imposter feelings, what happens? So I think very interestingly, we saw here that women who reported feeling like an imposter, they were more likely to say that they were also emotionally exhausted. And they also indicated in general that they liked their job less. So this concludes us that the imposter phenomenon, the imposter syndrome, is related to this emotional exhaustion and job satisfaction, such that people who feel like imposters, they have kind of their well-being decreases, and also their joy in their work decreases. So this is kind of a worrying a result in that sense, that it's therefore important to see, how we can reduce these imposter feelings. Secondly, again, very important for today, right, is these employability and risk-taking consequences. So we also saw that the women who in general felt more like an imposter, perceived lower job employability and were less likely to take risks at work. Well, the panel already discussed very impressively, I think, also the importance of taking risks, right, in your work, but also for your career. So again, it's, I think, an important finding that we see coming in this data, that if people tend to feel like imposters, that this reduces their likelihood to take risks. And it makes sense, right? When you feel like you could be found out soon, you kind of become a bit more hesitant to take these risks. So again, thank you for all the women who participated in the survey. I think these are very important insights that we can also share more broadly, and I hope that were insightful for you today as well. Moving forward from these most important results of the survey that we conducted, I would be happy to hear a little bit more also about your experiences with risk taking, and also in light of these results that I just presented, right? Is that something that you adhere to? Is that something that's familiar to you? So I hope we can, in breakout session, take a few minutes to also think about your risk-taking and your career confidence. With risk-taking, I think it's then important if I want to talk about you with your risk-taking, maybe it's important to kind of clearly get to what I'm talking about with risk-taking is that risk-taking is any kind of behavior. So it's kind of broad thing, right? Anytime doing something to achieve a goal, so some kind of goal-directed behavior, and then it has two conditions, has multiple outcomes. So you do something because you want to reach a certain goal, and then multiple things can happen. And one of these things is a negative thing, or even maybe a dangerous thing, right? So this is kind of risk-taking. So you do something while you know you can also have a negative outcome. This is kind of taking a risk. And indeed, again, as the panel also discussed, being in business and being in leadership positions almost inevitably means that at certain points you need to take risks, right? So on this slide, I have the example of entrepreneurship. So starting your own business, but that's of course definitely a decision that involves risk, right? So when you start a business, multiple things can happen, right? You can do very well. You could become very successful, but of course the business can also fail, resulting in, for instance, a lot of financial hazards. So this is a potential negative outcome. So this would then be defined as a risky decision. So in moving forward, let me quickly check the time. Yeah, that's great. I would like to invite you to together in breakout sessions talk about your likelihood to take risks in your work and in your career. And then I would like to invite you to each and every one of you to share an example of a time when you felt like an imposter and how this prevented you from taking risks, right? So when you felt like you didn't really belong, you felt like you could be found out, that maybe others thought too highly of you, how that prevented you from taking a risk. So we'd invite you to think about such a situation. And if you want to share it with the people in your breakout session, again, the breakout sessions are not videos, so just so you know that's a safe environment. So please try to explain the setting, the situation, and the consequence also. I think that's also very important, so we can have a look at that afterwards. Afterwards, I hope we can plenary discuss some of your group discussions also together. So please also assign one person to the group who can then summarize the discussion afterwards to all of us. Summarize what they discussed and maybe share one of the examples that they thought was valuable. So feel free to speak up.
I can go first.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So let's say the main topics we discussed just now is around first of all, if the imposter syndrome is linked to maybe the industry or maybe also to the gender. Because, for example, in our group, I feel that we all came from the industry where females were not very driven for. For example, I come from the spirit industry, and Andrea from our group, she's even working on the production side, which is not very often considered as a women job. So our observation is that very often we saw females feel more or tends to be more imposter situation than males. They feel less confident. They feel that they are not going to be success, even they have the capacity to do so. So I think it's very interesting. I think it's also linked to, it's not linked to the, let's say, total linked to industry, but more linked to, let's say, the differences between female and male, not only at workplace, but also from, let's say, from body, from society, from the conception, from the culture, very often. So, so yes, it's interesting to see that, and it's interesting to see that we very often females who can be capable to do the job, are less likely to take the job than males who does not have the right capability to do so, but they are willing to do it. Let's say they're more audacious, if I can say that, than females on this perspective.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, and I completely agree with many things that you said. Yeah, and to come back to your questions about, is it related to industry and is it related to gender? And I think it's what we see in the research on this is that it indeed is, but maybe in a bit more complex way than you would first think, because indeed overall the idea is often that women tend to feel more like imposters than men, but actually the research shows that it's a bit more complex than that. Because some studies indeed show that women feel more like imposters, while other studies do not find any differences between the degree to which men and women feel like imposters. So what we can kind of conclude now from the many studies that have been conducted is that indeed women feel like imposters more than men, but only in certain industries. So this kind of sums up also your experiences, I think. Only in these industries where, for instance, indeed not many women traditionally have worked, or which traditionally is seen as a very masculine job, in these kinds of sections and contexts, indeed women feel like imposters more. But it's not, right? So I think that's important to know, because we only see it in those contexts. So it's very important to understand that I don't think it's necessarily something that women are inherently more insecure or more likely to feel like imposter, but it's more that they are more likely to end up in these contexts that will make them feel out of place. So I think that very much relates also to your experience. Thank you for sharing that, Shia. Maybe one of the other groups wants to share some of their group discussions with us as well. So with some of you, I was in the group. So maybe for time reasons, I can also kind of share what we talked about there, is that indeed there were some, I think, very interesting examples shared. For instance, by one of the participants who said that the person was considered for a management position, but then first initially didn't take the job because the person thought that they would not be so suitable for the job, right? And this is indeed very much this kind of insecurity. While indeed your managers and people around you say you should do it, then you should get this promotion or this job. And sometimes it can be a risky decision, and indeed these imposter feelings can prevent you then from taking the job. Because you don't really see yourself doing well in that position. A similar example was, so this was a completely new job. A similar example that was shared in our group is a person who said, I tend to not take on leadership positions because of this. And then explaining it with the feeling, maybe other people are better at it, or maybe other people know more than I do. So I think that these are very interesting examples indeed of how these impulsive feelings can prevent you from taking these risky decisions where actually your career can benefit from quite a bit. So I'm kind of going back to the slide here because also we're running to the end with regards to time. Kristen, right? It's going quickly. But thank you so much for your insights, and I hope it was helpful for you as well to think about these concepts, right, and how they relate to each other, and how they might benefit you sometimes, but also how they might hinder you in your ambitions and careers. So maybe as a final note, what I think is important to tell you is that indeed we talked about this risk, right, and how feeling like an imposter might prevent you from taking these risks. And what we also see in this research project, that also this perceived employability is also very important, also with regards to this risk-taking, right? So the degree to which you feel like you can make a promotion inside your organization or could be hired somewhere else can also be very important in the degree to which you take risks, right? So if you have a feeling that you can easily take on other jobs, also in your career choices, you will be more likely to take risks, because in those, if you have that kind of mindset, you feel maybe I'm failing here, but then I could always take on a job somewhere else, right? So this might be a very helpful remedy to get you thinking about how you could make these risky decisions. And then I would like to bring it back also a little bit to what the panel started with. I think some very important things were said there as well. which also relate to these imposter feelings in organizations. And two of the things that I think were very important is, one, you have a responsibility also as a leader, right? So we saw that it's very important. So what determines whether people feel like imposters is very much about the context and how they are treated. So as a leader, if you have employees, you also have a very important role and responsibility to create this atmosphere, to create a psychological safe environment where people can flourish and make these risky decisions. So maybe I will skip this for time reasons, but maybe to end with the final conclusions that I think this awesome research project showed us is that overall, we saw in this research project, which is very good news, is that the sampled WIM women are very confident. Yes, they were also very confident with regards to their careers, so very high career confidence. And for those women who did occasionally feel like imposters, we did see that this had negative consequences for how they felt, right? So for their emotional exhaustion and the degree to which they took risks and the degree to which they were confident in their career. So especially for those who experience these feelings, I would like to end with this quote and with this motivation, so to say, by Marissa Mayer, who is the president and CEO of Yahoo, who said, if you push through that feeling of being scared, that feeling of taking risks, really amazing things can happen. So I hope today's information will help you do that as well. Thank you so much for your contributions today. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for actively participating today in the breakout sessions, and maybe even in the research project you already completed the survey. So thank you then for doing that. And as Kristen just said, we will send out another round. So if you're still interested in completing our survey, please do so. And of course, thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Win, for agreeing to let me host the presentation again here, but also to conduct this very interesting research projects with you. So thank you again.